Right. Well, today I've got 4 passages I want us to work through in John chapter 12. And these move us from Jesus and his life and his works to his final week on earth. We've been tracking through the Gospel of John from the beginning of the year. And one of the things about John's Gospel, it's 21 chapters long, and about half of it covers the last week of his life. And we start here in chapter 12, and we begin that last week and the elements that happen to it. All that's prior to this is his 2.5 or so years of ministry with his disciples. That takes all that time. But in these last chapters, we'll have, the acts that move towards his arrest and his crucifixion, but also some of his great fine-tuned teaching about what life is all about and what being his follower is all about. But before we get to those things, we have the things that happen in chapter 12, and several themes that we've covered along the way will get picked up again. But it gives us some more clues and some more cues into solving this mystery of who Jesus is. And so our first scene comes at the beginning of chapter 12, verses 1 through 11. And this is how it goes. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus lived. Now, we looked at Lazarus last week. Lazarus was a friend of Jesus. He died, and Jesus gets there 4 days too late to help him get healed. But in the process, Jesus raises him from the dead after 4 days, and so people are blown away by this. So this becomes a reference point for a lot of things here. So he goes to Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it out on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there and came not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well, for on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him. All right, so here's our first vignette, or first scene in these 4 stories, and a couple dynamics are coming here. Mary's costly anointing. She takes this expensive perfume and pours it on his feet and wipes his feet with her hair, and these are very, somewhat intimate acts. A woman in those days did not let her hair down in the presence of men other than her husband. So there's this potential of looking at it scandalously, but the picture here is certainly of devotion and of worship of Jesus as she looks at him, and it's exceptionally extravagant, this devotion. I mean, this is Judas says it's probably worth a year's wages, possibly as much as $10,000 or $12,000 in today's terms, maybe even more. But it's just a lot. Now, when I think of the word extravagant, I'm reminded of one of my son Michael's classmates when he was at Trinity College down in Chicago. This guy was from England, and they would drive around, and he would look at the highways, and he'd look at the shoulders, and he said, "Your shoulders here are extravagant." So in England and many places, they don't have much shoulders. They just have enough, so if you get a little bit over the line, you're okay. But you can park, you can put a whole truck on there. That's more than is necessary. That's amazing. And that's what this devotional thing that Mary does for Jesus is. It's extravagant. It's so over the top. I can imagine, having used the whole bottle, that it's made the whole house pretty strong smelling. In fact, that smell would probably linger over the next week here. Jesus would have had him on other descriptions of this in Mark and Matthew. It says that also she poured it over his head as well. So just from head to toe, his robe undoubtedly would have just been saturated with the smell of this expensive perfume. And as this happens, well, some people are like, well, that is just too much. Judas points that out, and I think maybe rightly. I mean, it's at least a concern, right? If you got this much value in something, I mean, you're going to use it in all one, just on this? Why would you do that? Certainly we in the church are not immune to those kind of questions. Like, why are we spending so much on this stuff? That could be used for the poor, or it could be used for outreach or something. But as those things are said, and certainly John in writing this, he's quick to point out who said it and what he thought of Judas. This is the betraying guy. And by the way, he's not concerned about the poor anyways. He just helps himself to the money. But Jesus says, no, hold on here. This was done for purpose. And probably not even Mary was sensing the things that Jesus was seeing and speaking about this, that in doing this, she was preparing his body for the burial that was going to happen within the next week. But Jesus says this is done, that is something, and that it is important and it's good. And sometimes it's good to do things that are just a little bit over the top. When it comes to loving and praising God, he will not let her be disparaged about this. And says this is okay. Sometimes extravagance is a good thing. But the second dynamic here is that Lazarus is there, and this mention of Lazarus and the fact that he's been raised from the dead, which gets mentioned a couple times here, is pretty important, significant enough that people are like, let's see this guy. We heard he was dead, and now he's alive. What does he look like after 4 days being dead? Is he really there? Because we heard that, and again, it was 4 days. After 3 days, we know that there's no coming back, and yet there he is. And with all that and the dynamics it's putting on the crowd, the people that are coming to Jesus, those leaders of the people, the religious leaders, like, we got to get rid of this guy too. This is just becoming worse and worse for them. So our first scene is about faith and extravagance and God being honored and lifted up by this woman, but also seeing God continue to work. Which leads us to our second story, starting in verse 12. The next day, the great crowd that had come for the festival heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. They took palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel." Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it is written, "Do not be afraid, daughter Zion. See, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt." At first, his disciples did not understand all this. Only after Jesus was glorified did they realize that these things had been written about him and that these things had been done to him. Now the crowd that was with him when he called Lazarus from the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to spread the word. Many people, because they had heard that he had performed this sign, went out to meet him. So the Pharisees said to one another, "See, this is getting us nowhere. Look how the whole world has gone after him." All right, so our second scene is a scene that's familiar to us, certainly because last month we remembered this exactly because it's part of the church calendar. We remembered Palm Sunday and talked a bit about that and its dynamics. But one of the things is, as it fulfills scriptures, and we have fulfillment of scriptures in Psalm 118, as well as Zechariah, when Zechariah prophesies that the king will be coming on the colt of a donkey. There Jesus is, and Jesus is, well, he's making as clear a comment about who he is as possible in this scenario. He is on this colt of a donkey, and he's saying, yes, I am the Messiah. I am intentionally getting on this thing and doing this. And the people, they've got all this exuberance. But as John reflects upon it at the end of this, even his disciples, at first, they didn't understand all this. So here's this scene, it's all happening, you're like, what is this all about? What's going on here? And on some level, probably there's some misguided exuberance here. Because thinking that Jesus was, well, if he's the Messiah, what is the Messiah going to do? He's going to get rid of, well, that foreign influence. At that time, Israel was controlled by the Romans. And so their great hope for getting rid of them was the Messiah to take care of them and remove them from their midst. And so that they're with excitement, and the waving of palms was a memory when Judas Maccabeus had driven the Greeks out, and some of the detestable things they had done in the book of Maccabees. These were things that they hoped for again, and so this waving of palms, there is great hope there. But as we know the story, the exuberance was not for some political change that was going to happen, but Jesus had something entirely different going on. But nevertheless, there's all this exuberance. And again, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, they looked at this and all they saw was disaster. This just keeps getting worse. We have to do something. Which brings us to our third story. And starting in verse 20, it says this: Now there were some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the festival. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, with a request. Sir, they said, we would like to see Jesus. Philip went to Andrew and Philip in turn told Jesus. Jesus replied, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly, I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Anyone who loves their life will lose it, while anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honor the one who serves me. And now my soul is troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came from heaven. I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. The crowd was there, heard it, and said it had thundered. Others said an angel had spoken to him. Jesus said, this voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out, and I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. He said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. The crowd spoke up. We have heard from the law that the Messiah will remain forever. So how can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is the Son of Man? Then Jesus told them, you're going to have the light just a little while longer. Walk while you have the light before darkness overtakes you. Whoever walks in the dark does not know where they are going. Believe in the light while you have the light, so that you may become children of light. When he had finished speaking, Jesus left and hid himself from them. Well, so as news and interest about Jesus has grown, it's moved outside even the Jewish people. There are people outside the Jewish faith who are coming and wanting to discover who Jesus is. They want a little picture, and we get of who he is and what he's about. And I think in this there's a little picture of this idea of those other sheep that when Mike was talking about Jesus as the good shepherd in John 10 a couple weeks ago. There's this picture of, I have sheep that are not here, other sheep. And who are the other sheep? But those from all over the world. And now we have Greeks that are coming and looking at him and just trying to discover him. And as Jesus responds to that in parts, he begins to speak as well about this is what's going to happen. These are the next step. And we see as he describes this, again, a troubled heart. Some of the other Gospels will speak a little more detail about in the Garden of Gethsemane, his desire that the cup be taken from him. Because this was going to be a hard thing, these next steps that happen to him. But he realizes as well, this is why I came. This is what I've come here for. And he says this prayer, Lord, be glorified. And the voice comes from heaven, and people hear this voice, and they're like, whoa, did you hear that? And Jesus says, that voice wasn't for me. That was for you, to give you hope, to give you some understanding that God is in this mix. And God doesn't do this very often, does he? Where he does something that's so right out there, we can't do anything but say that has to be from him. I've not audibly heard God say something like this, although I have seen him work in ways and answer prayers that were so specific that I was like, you know what, this has got to have been God's act. But even that, I don't see that in great detail every day. But every now and then, and oftentimes when I'm struggling with faith and I'm thinking that, this faith life, it's a good philosophy, but I'm not feeling connected to you, God. God, can you do something weird? Do something weird and show me, you heard me, and just bring something along that will remind me that this is a personal relationship we have. This is not just good ideas and good theology and good philosophy, but these are the dynamics of a relationship you have with us. And having seen some of those, and I've told some of these stories along the way about someone coming out of the blue and speaking at our church, giving a testimony that was completely unexpected, but had exactly to do with the passage I was struggling to preach on that day. It's like, whoa, where did that come from? Oh yeah, you were listening. Sometimes God does that. In this moment, God brings his voice from heaven, and Jesus says, this is for you to be thinking about and reminding that God does the thing, and that's, as we go through this, that the hour is coming. And there'll be some judgment that comes along with this as well, Jesus says, as well as a mention of the prince of this world and his ouster. That some great cataclysmic thing is going to happen because of Jesus' work, that the prince of this world, another name for the devil or for Satan, his ouster is coming. And so his encouragement is, look at the light. This theme of light echoes throughout the Gospel of John. Again and again, he comes to this and gives this as a picture of what he was sent to do. And what does light do? We have lights on in this room. We have light from the sun. But in the midst of darkness, lights help us out. To be in a dark wooded trail or to be in your basement without lights is probably to stumble into things. But the light gives us the path. It shows us where the troubles are and guides us to where we need to go. And so this theme of Jesus as the light of the world is used again and again because he does light our and guide us to what this life is all about. Well, that leads to our final story here, or our final scene here. Verse 37. Even after Jesus had performed so many signs in their presence, they still will not believe in him. This was to fill the word of Isaiah the prophet, Lord, who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For this reason, they could not believe, because, as Isaiah says elsewhere, he has blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, so they can neither see with their eyes, nor understand with their hearts, nor turn, and I would heal them. Isaiah said this because he saw Jesus' glory and spoke about him. Yet at the same time, many even among the leaders believed in him. But because of the Pharisees, they would not openly acknowledge their faith for fear they would be put out of the synagogue. For they loved human praise more than praise from God. Then Jesus cried out, "Whoever believes in me does not believe in me only, but in the one who sent me. The one who looks at me is seeing the one who sent me. I have come into the world as a light, so that no one who believes in me should stay in darkness. If anyone hears my words but does not keep them, I do not judge that person, for I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. There is a judge for the one who rejects me and does not accept my words. The very words I have spoken will condemn them at the last day. For I did not speak on my own, but the Father who sent me commanded me to say all that I have spoken. I know that his command leads to eternal life. So whatever I say is just what the Father has told me to say." Well, after all the things that Jesus has done, all the healings he's done, even this raising of Lazarus from the dead, unbelief continues. It's expressed here in this passage in verse 37, it seems like most people were not believing him, which is just a little bit frustrating. It's like, he's done all these things right before your eyes. And some of us who are living here in 2023 is like, if I could only see just one of those things, that would be amazing. But you saw these things and you still won't believe. What is wrong with them? But that's part of the dynamic of life and faith, isn't it? That some will take a look at that and they will believe and they will respond, but not everyone. And what makes a difference? Oftentimes it's the attitude or the disposition of our heart. What's important to us? And if our own things are the most important things to us, well then, to believe in a God, to believe in someone that's bigger than us and has control of things, well, that's a hard thing to do. And as Jesus reflects upon this, hey, this is what I've come to do. I've come to rescue the world, to save this world, not to judge it. But on the other hand, if you don't accept this rescue, then judgment is coming. As I think about all four of these stories coming together, it is about, well, how do we live a life? And how do we come to faith? And what is it all about? Some of you know I've been coaching baseball with Chris Hartig and Sarah and Jim Rose. And one of the things that I've been looking at is how do we teach these little ones how to hit? And how do you teach like 6 and 7-year-olds how to hit and throw? And you know, I've played a lot of baseball and softball in my life, and so I have just all these ideas of what to do and how to do it, and you want to give all that knowledge in one like big, blah, here it is. But they're not ready for that. And I was watching a video this week, and the guy said, you know, there are some things, you know, we have developed skill along with ability, but before you can do skillful things, you got to develop the ability. And so this one coach is, and working with his own kids, he said, you know what? I've just gone to this idea of just hit the ball as hard as you can and throw the ball as hard as you can. Because before you can do the skillful things, you got to know how to swing the bat. You got to know how to throw the ball. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of failure. When you swing as hard as you can hit that ball, you're going to miss it. But that's going to teach you something. And when you start throwing the ball as hard as you can, you know, you can think it's going to go straight there, right to Dick in the back, and it's going to go to Laura all the way back there. It's like, what's going on there? And you figure that out. You know, you may break a window every now and then. Stay away from windows. In golf, there's this phrase you use sometimes, grip it and rip it. And sometimes you just go and try and swing it as hard as you can. Just see what happens. And again, you learn things about that. Or there's the aspects of the faith life that go with that as well. Because as we come to faith in who Jesus is and discover what it means to be a follower of his, there's just a lot of things we're not going to get. Like the disciples, the parade goes on, the palms are being waved, and they're not understanding what's going on here. But what they're going to have to do along the way is discover, and they're going to make some mistakes, and they're going to make some colossal ones. We mention oftentimes about Peter, but it's not just Peter. Others make these same mistakes. They flee when Jesus is arrested. They're fearful. And we're going to go through times like that. But this idea of just learning to live this out, it takes steps, and we've got to develop the ability to know who God is and exercise faith and talk with people who know and have heard it, but also read for ourselves. But we've got to try it. What does it mean to say yes to Jesus and therefore no to something else? These are not easy things to do, and sometimes we will get it wrong, maybe epically. But we keep trying. As a baseball hitter keeps swinging the bat even when he's missed. Because as you continue to do this, as we continue to live this life, we discover what it does mean to live for him and to walk with him. Jesus, when he comes, he came to glorify the Father. He came to guide people to seeing him and knowing him. But it's a lot of trial and error for us. You know, we can listen to people who've done it, but We got to take those steps ourselves a lot of times. This is our life. This is our faith. If you're a follower of the Lord Jesus Christ, do you know the ways you've blown in the past? I've mentioned some of them recently here that I'm just so ashamed of. Things that I did when I was in high school. I was like, how could you be so stupid? And yet, over time, I've gotten forgiveness for some of those things and have learned to refine life and to listen to things before reacting and to use my faith as a guide and not necessarily my emotions. We do this by walking it out, by living every day. And when we mistake, when we fall down, we get back and say, oops, and sorry, Lord, I confess my sin. But then receive his forgiveness and begin walking with him again. Not thinking, oh, I blew it. I'm no good. I just give up. Keep going. Keep working at this. And maybe you're still wondering about faith and just wondering, what does it look like? Well, all of us came to those places where we wondered, what does it mean to have faith in God, to believe in God in the first place, but also now to believe in Jesus and what he's done. And certainly we can look at historical things, and there's all kinds of things that people who are defenders of the faith will say, these are facts that you can hang your hat on. But at some point, we just need to give it a try. We need to say, God, are you really there? Are you really there? Can you show me? Do some things. Help me to see you. If there's things that are messing me up in my head in terms of thinking about you, allow me to see that. But if you're there, I need to see that. That's a simple prayer that all of us can do. And I think God recognizes faith that is extended. Little steps along the way that begin the life journey with him. Where are you at in this? Maybe it's time just to grip it and rip it. To give it a try. See, God, do something here. Let me see you. And we'll figure it out as we go. And for the rest of us, we're refining our way. Our batting is a little bit more even and a little more measured. We've got some wisdom. Our faith has grown and developed. And we're able to walk with him in wiser ways than we used to. Doesn't mean we're not going to blow it, but we come back to him. Because the things we remember before in the Lord's Supper, he did that because you matter. Because you are worthwhile to him and he loves you. And the sins in your life that separate you from him, it's like, I got a better way. Come back to me and let's do this together. Let's stand for closing prayer.